Hey, Cary, it's a real pleasure for me to chat with you about No Time to Die. It's a movie that I deeply loved. I mean, it's like a truly remarkable achievement. And I have a few questions for you. And the thing is that the obvious one, but I'm sorry, I have to ask you, what is your relationship with Bond? I mean, is it something that were you a massive Bond fan, or you're like,
I didn't grow up being, an encyclopedic Bond fan. I saw all the Bond films growing up. I played the video games with my cousins, when we were, kids. I was always aware of, the debate of who is the best Bond. I think, for me, what really, I think, brought me back into Bond, especially as an adult, was seeing Daniel Craig in Casino Royale. It was a really, I think, big departure, from what they had been doing with Pierce Brosnan, even though there was some continuity, like having Dame Judi Dench as M through both. But, there was something about going back to the beginning, about the visceralness of it, and kind of dispensing with some of the broader style that was in the previous version. And it just kind of went back to basics in a way. It was simpler, technology wise, plot wise. And I think what Daniel brought, the layers of complexity, the vulnerability, especially an emotional vulnerability, which we hadn't seen in Bond, which, now having gone back through the novels, in preparation for this film, I saw that, Fleming had written some of that complexity already into the Bond character way back, in the initial stories. And Daniel, I think, resurrected that complexity in his version of Bond.
I think I share totally your enthusiasm regarding what Daniel brought to the character. I mean, it's like it was a true revitalization. I mean, like a rebirth. It was. I remember myself, like I was in awe when I saw Casino Royale as well.
Well, I mean, what was also cool about Casino Royale, when you think of like, the tentpole blockbuster films, even just structurally, it was if you think about the act breaks in that movie, like when Vesper Lynd's brought in the story on that train on the way to the big poker tournament, it's almost like a restart of the film. So the first part, part of the film is like this other movie almost, and then the second part starts, and it's either a 2-act movie or a 5-act movie. We can break it down and decide what it is, but it is definitely a part 2 within one film. And I kind of liked that unpredictability of it. That kind of, to me as a viewer, it added more of a sense of intrigue and tension about where this could potentially be going because of that reset.
But that feeling of unpredictability, what you just mentioned, is something that is truly alive in your Bond. And so it's something that, as you were dealing with that, the structure, I mean, you were involved in the screenwriting yourself. Is it something that you, of course, obviously you wanted to bring to your project as well?
Yeah, I don't know if I could really ever do something that I wasn't writing on, but just because it's to understand the material. Writing is such a, speaking of DNA, not to be, on theme with our story, but like, the DNA of what you're creating starts with the writing, and especially even just visualizing while writing. I don't know how you work, in terms of reinterpreting the screenplays that you're working with, but, as a director, you're not just there to, make a drawing book for the screenplay. You're supposed to be adding all kind of 3-dimensionality and 4-dimensionality to it. And I have a hard time doing that unless I am writing.
For me, when I take a screenplay that has not been, that I didn't work on, the way that I can bring the screenplay closer to me is by storyboarding. Yeah. By storyboarding, I rewrite. There's a process. Then after the storyboard, I go back into the screenwriting, and then we rewrite the screenplay according to the storyboard. It's something that you need to, from what I understand, is that you need to put your hands on the keyboard in order to bring this process.
Yeah, I mean, there's a kind of internal storyboarding that happens in my mind in the description elements, of the screenplay itself. and I don't always put everything down that I'm seeing in my mind, but to me, it's kind of like a compressed code of what I eventually want to do, with the visuals. And the Bond is actually one of the first films that was pretty heavily storyboarded and prevised, like animatic prevised. And that was an interesting process. I don't know for you, the storyboarding process, like how you create your boards. I know like Tony Scott would draw his own storyboards, but like, do you draw your own boards? Do you sit next to your storyboard artist and kind of explain?
I have two things in my life that I'm deeply ashamed of is that I cannot play music and I'm a very bad drawer. and so, but I create a relationship with a storyboard artist that drew most of my movies. And it's like a brother to me that I'm so close to him. One guy. And that guy, I developed it's like an extension of my brain. People say I speak French, a little bit of English, and I speak Udeki is the language of. So it's like, do you draw yourself? Are you a good one? Can you draw?
I mean, like I can draw a storyboard, but it probably takes me like 7 times as long as a sketch that some of the storyboard artists that I've worked with can do it. What I tend to do is I'll do like a plot plan of where I think my coverage is and kind of the order of the coverage, and then, talk with the storyboard artists. And then from there, they'll start, creating images based on what I'm saying. I think it's here, and I think the camera will do this. And then, you kind of refine it from there.
It's a thing, talking about visual style. I will say that I watched the movie a few times, and each time I had been very, very, very impressed. By the camera work and by the visual language of the movie, that I think that it is very unique. I think that there's a lot of I feel totally your personality in it, which is very difficult in an action movie like that. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering, I would love if you could talk a bit about how you approach the visual style and your work with Linus. I think that to be able to make sure that there's several questions here, but that make sure that the action sequence don't feel are being part of the same movie, follow the same DNA, follow the same visual logic, that are not implanted by multiple units coming from everywhere in the world. I mean, it feels that you were behind the camera in every single shot.
That was tricky. What you're talking about right there, especially, dealing with second unit and action units, is that, there's a lot of multiple departments working simultaneously, and the communication that has to be involved to kind of achieve some sort of continuity, right, on style, is highly repetitive, because you can have these long meetings discussing it. You could show storyboards, but it still doesn't translate always to execution. And so even while shots are coming in, I'm sometimes the second unit is not even in the same time zone, right? So you're getting images at different times of night, and you're trying to communicate what you're going for. And sometimes it's successful, sometimes you're not. I find it difficult, to try and maintain that continuity all the way, throughout. It takes a lot of energy, a lot of the energy that would normally go into the first unit. Lena Sandgren and I, as a kind of dogma for this one, wanted to make sure that for second unit, for example, in action unit shots, that they weren't just putting like 7 cameras down in kind of traditional action coverage, like, oh, let's put a camera where either the vehicle or the person is going to land. Let's put a camera that's like the side view. Let's put the helicopter circling around, but actually trying to find shots that had a kind of choreography. So whether it was a panning and tracking or something, that there was the way it started isn't necessarily the way it ended. And not every shot can be like that, but in terms of like connective tissue and making sure that there was a kind of, rather than carpet bombing coverage and finding the order of shots in post, having specific order of shots going into it. So, even on simpler setups, like in Norway, which is the opening sequence, there were shots that I wanted to do, whether it was the top-down shot or the shot behind the villain as he approaches the house that then goes past him towards the house, that there was this kind of forward moving towards an inevitable outcome, right? The whole point of the opening was pushing towards the inevitability of it. And that's the same thing for like that theme goes into what's inevitably going to happen to Bond.
Yeah, I just want you to know it's a total success because you feel that as a viewer, and that's visual styles is applied to. That's what I thought was impressive. It was really like there was an inner logic to the camera work that was sustained through the whole movie, and then but also it provides it's kind of interesting because it's like it blend the intimacy of the movie with the scope of the movie, with the action of the movie. You're always going from something close to a character pushing forward and moving toward what will be the landscape of the action later.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was the hope and desire there, and I love shots, I mean, it's almost like, in Westerns, right? You see a lot in spaghetti Westerns, what especially what the Italians were able to do with the wide, and the close, which you also do a lot in your films, you go very wide, feel the scope of things that, humans would normally never be able to see, and then also make it very personal at the same time, where their shot starts off with a character and goes into their POV, past them or something, so that the audience is transported into the kind of the mental perspective of your character. I've in your films, I've noticed no matter what DP you're working with, whether, it's in Arrival or it's in Sicario, there is also continuity of visuals there. So, there's a language coming from you. And I think that's always the wonderful thing about watching how different directors work, is you can give 10 different directors the same script and you'll have 10,
but it's like I think that talking about that is that I never done a Bond movie, but I guess it must be a logistical and a technical monster.
Yeah.
And you were able to make by far the most emotional Bond movie ever made. I mean, it's very uncommon to see people coming out of a Bond movie crying out of the theater. It was like I watched the movie in London. All the crowd around me, the people were emotional. We were all emotional watching a Bond movie, and it's like to achieve that in that the scale of thing in that context. I mean, to protect that emotional trend through all movie. Can you talk a little bit about that here?
Yeah. So, the idea of Bond meeting his end in this film did not come from me. That was something that Daniel and Barbara had wanted to do, and had, I think, been looking for an opportunity to do it in previous films. And I think even there was a discussion in Spectre whether that would end that way. But I don't think they could have ended Spectre with Blofeld winning, on meeting his end. So, with Spectre out of the way in this film, you potentially have the opportunity to do that. It was something that, being able to start with Casino and end with the end of a Bond was something that no one had ever really done before. And we also had the opportunity, I think, in these films, because all the films are connected somehow. Where in previous Bonds, they're kind of almost like a
single units. Yeah.
Unit chapters, in this mythical character. But in Daniel's run, there's actual narrative, and you can recall characters and build upon sort of emotional investments the audience have made over the previous 4 films. And I definitely drew upon Casino a lot in that relationship with Vesper Lynd. And I would say his relationship with Vesper Lynd was the most emotional version of Bond we'd seen since On Her Majesty's Secret Service, when he actually got married. I think for this one, given they started with Casino in the series, there was a lot drawn from You Only Live Twice, which was the last book that Fleming wrote. And in that one, you have the Poison Garden, Bond has a child. There's a lot of things in this film that are there if you're aware of the novels. But the idea of an emotional ending, I think, to me made sense because one thing I have noticed just in my observation of men like Bond is there is no matter how stone cold killer you are through the prime of your life, somewhere like warriors become gentler. Something in their heart changes. And especially as people or men get older, there's an emotional side of them that's inevitably comes through. And I think it's a danger. It's a danger for someone like Bond to have vulnerability. It's dangerous to have people in his life that he could endanger simply by the nature of his job, and also that endanger him by, their exposure to the bad guys out there. And Barbara and Daniel wanted an emotional film. It was something they talked to me about right from the beginning. It wasn't an accident that it ended up being an emotional film. And I think there's a lot of reasons going into that. And you could tie it simply to the story in Bond, but I think you could also relate it to Daniel and Barbara's experience making these films. I think there's a lot of love, in that,
yes,
and a lot of love for what Daniel's done, and wanting to send him off in a way that felt befitting for someone who's committed 15 years of their life to playing this character.
Yeah, it brought so much. So you feel that there's like that junction between cinema and life. I understand that, but how did you deal with the pressure of making that last Daniel Craig 007 appearance on screen?
I didn't think so much about like the fact that we're spending $300 million, or that
no, you can't.
No, I was replacing a director, or that that we had one of the shortest post-productions any Bond film or any film of this kind of nature had. We had a 16-week post-production schedule. I mean, I was aware of all these things, and there wasn't really time to to bemoan it. You just had to get on with it. And I think the biggest kind of focus of energy for me was getting the screenplay right, and then making sure all departments could follow suit. And what was difficult about that is that, almost like juggling, I had a lot of things in my head that didn't have time to get out in paper, always didn't have time to get to every department that needed it. So there was a lot of change orders and a lot of updates and a lot of revisions coming through constantly. And what I think is a miracle, actually, looking at the screenplay and then the finished film, is that, oftentimes in movies, you have a problem in the execution somewhere, and you spend a lot of post-production trying to fix that execution so that the story feels seamless, and moving scenes around, and sometimes they feel modular. But what is a miracle, I think, on this one is that the script order of the movie is exactly what the editing of the movie ended up being. We did not move any scenes around. We trimmed some scenes down. I think we might have even cut a scene or two, but very little, like kind of like shoe leather kind of stuff. But
yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. Sorry to interrupt you. It's a lot of credit to you, because I think that again, those movies are huge machines, and you having to deal with all the pre-production. What I'm understanding right now is that you were still in the writing process as you were prepping the movie, or were you still writing as you were shooting even?
Absolutely, yeah, still writing while shooting, and we had issues, like the things the inevitable problems that happen in shooting. And like Daniel, for example, got injured within the first 2 weeks of shooting. So he was out, not even able to stand or walk for about 6 weeks. So suddenly we're moving stuff that was supposed to be 3 months down the line forward to be shot. And I had a rut. That's what I was saying. I had things in my head that didn't have time to go down paper. I had an outline. I knew where the story was heading, but I hadn't fleshed out everything yet. It was more skeletal than muscular. And so I had, to rush to get these pieces done and write and direct at the same time. So I think that was the biggest pressure. I think just having to work, day and night, weekends, to keep the head above water, to keep all departments moving forward, to have
you have all my respect. That must be, I mean, to keep your mental sanity in that kind of context, doing a movie of that scale. I mean,
gray hairs, man.
Yeah. That's I got it. Yes. In all that madness, I will say that I think you brought from every actor the best out of them, and of course of Daniel. And I would like to talk a little bit about acting, more specifically, of course, about Daniel. He did a really one of his best performances on screen, and I was wondering, was he very involved, or you felt you because you're dealing with Bond, so I mean that you are you have this world. It's a world that has been formatted for decades, So did you feel that you had less space? Or was it more of a collaboration with Daniel, or how was it?
There was definitely, space. Everyone has really strong opinions. Some might look at that as a nuisance, right? Having producers with strong creative opinions, or being present even on a daily basis, or having, you're the lead actor, with executive privileges and wanting to get involved, down to dialogue and scene construction. But I would say, with this group, it was a blessing, because we're dealing with very smart people, experienced. This family, the reason why they've done 25 films and they've been successful because of the choices and oftentimes bold choices they've made. And Daniel, having played Bond now for the last 4 years, and at least for me, he is my favorite Bond, and reasons we mentioned earlier. And I found it enormously helpful to have him not only as a resource but as a collaborator to even understand how. It's like, how do you write dialogue for Bond? He's a man of few words, which means those few words better work. It's easy to write long monologues, actually easier than writing.
It must be interesting to, in a way. First of all, I will say that I totally agree with you. I mean, cinema is work. It's teamwork, and sometimes when you have the right people around you, it's fantastic to have great producers that can give you guidance. I totally understand what you're saying here, but you in a way you were like a guest in a huge family. I mean, all the cast has been working together since several years. That must be interesting to be you are the director, and at the same time you are the new element in the family.
Yeah, you're trying to figure out all the dynamics, all the
exactly. Exactly. Yeah, family means And talking about, I think there's something that I thought was again truly remarkable about in the movie was the work you did with children. I think that Lisa, Dora, Sonnet, and Colin Defoe were really. It was very impressive what you brought in this performance.
We spent a lot of time trying to find Mathilde and the young Madeline, and Colleen, for example, who played young Madeline, only has that one scene, but she has to do a lot in that one scene. And, this actress we found, this was one of her first projects. She hadn't really done anything before, but she was fantastic. And I think being able to speak French also helped. So talking with her and Leia and kind of keeping it comfortable and not feeling too, foreign and abstract for her was helpful. But Lisa Dora was amazing to work with Lisa Dora, because I've never seen usually the young actors I've worked with, they're just living it and kind of make believe, and the fantasy becomes reality for them. Lisa Dora actually could switch between being Lisa Dora for real and going into acting mode. And she knew she was acting. She knew that what she was doing was as an actor, and used to kind of walk around like a little diva in a funny way, And, but she was able to I was looking for a kid that could express pathos. I was looking for a kid who had a great missing in her, a lack of a father in her life, and what that would do to her. There was that amazing French film that came out in the late 90s, I think, called Ponette.
Yes.
That amazing performance, where the young girl loses her mother and has to deal with the grief of losing her mother. And I've never seen a performance like that from a kid. And I think that was sort of like the goal, is to find someone who could express that, because there's a tragedy in the story. And the tragedy is this girl was deprived of a father for basically all her life up to this point. And when she finally meets him, will be deprived of him again. So it's actually someone who's experiencing as much loss as Bond experienced as a child, and Leia does as well. So there's sort of the passing on the baton of these difficult lives, and therefore the kid couldn't be like a typical bubbly kid. That she needed to be able to communicate a depth and a level of life experience beyond her years.
Yeah, and with a very impressive precisions and truth. That's why I was wondering how you could, of course, casting, but on set to be able to specifically with the little one at the end, I was blown away by your work, and I guess that it means that you were able to create a very strong bubble of intimacy on set in order to be able to bring something like that up.
Yeah, if you think about the scene, for example, when Bond's speaking to Safin, right? So you have the classic villain meets Bond scene, but now we also have a child there, and the child's at risk, and we have the camera running on her, a lot of the scenes, and it's, first of all, having a 5-year-old sit through anything for 5 or 10 minutes long is difficult, let alone on a movie set where you're doing it, take after take after take, and camera setup after camera setup. And Lisa, she did it, to her credit. Obviously the kids get breaks and get to run around and blow steam, but the fact that the entire day there was a continuity to her performance. I mean, I was I was before the day, that shooting day, I was so concerned, will we be able to get through this day with her? And she was amazing. And we had a double just in case.
Okay.
But she was great. She was completely focused. So,
and the way you were directing her is like you were talking her as she was an adult, meaning that she was or did you add tricks, or it's like
no, I've never really employed tricks or ways to like create fear or happiness and that kind of things with any actor, adult or child. I prefer just to have conversations ahead of time and then, rely on the professionalism of my cast. And I think that went for the kid as well. We had this amazing young lady who was also kind of like a handler and a coach with her that would kind of prep her before he came in. We'd have sort of like keywords and things for her to remember, but it was very real and very kind of transparent in how it was attached to the scene and what the scene was trying to do for each character emotionally and what each person wanted out of that scene.
It's masterwork. Frankly, you have all my admiration. I can, if you're going to be happy
to be working with a kid in the next Dune.
Yeah, it seems like it. That's maybe why I was so sensitive to your work with the kids. But if we get if you don't mind getting a little bit technical, there's a scene for me that if we go back to visual style, it's a kind of gem, and it's a pure beauty. The attack of the laboratory. I mean, as a director, I can see very often where what are the tricks, or I can feel the technology behind. Not in this scene. I think that it's absolutely seamless. It's pure poetry. The one attack at the beginning of the movie, when you have those commando gliding slowly on a wall, on a building wall at sunrise or sunset, I don't know, and then getting into the laboratory and those silhouettes like a ballet, going inside in silence. I thought it was like absolutely mesmerizing. And I was wondering, stupid question. How did you do it? That opening shot, was it done on cam, or it's actually a trick that you guys, can you talk a little bit about it? Or is it just like
that was a scene we did not storyboard, other than, having to communicate, to the stunt team how I wanted to do the shot down to the upside down to the upside down to the regular. But, that was a scene on the schedule that was supposed to be 2 days. I initially had written this scene that was an attack on like a kind of a Tokyo conference that took place in this theater where these, people came in, crashed in, locked it off, and then gassed the people on the inside. And it was a very elaborate thing where the kind of the people infiltrated dressed as firefighters and blah, blah, blah. It was a sequence that never ended up happening. It was too long. It was too expensive. So we ended up cutting it. And the new version needed to be much simpler and a 2-day shoot. And that sequence is also the sequence where we blew up the 007 stage by accident.
I forgot about that anecdote.
I'm not sure people remember that, but we had, that was the second big event we had after Daniel's injury, was we blew up our main stage. When there was something, Chris Corball was working with the vendor they hadn't worked with before or something, and the explosion was just a bit more powerful than everyone expected and blew out some walls. And
wow,
yeah, I was inside the stage for that, and I still remember the feeling of my lungs just being like compressed.
Ouch. Wow.
But the way we went about it was kind of just piece by piece. I knew I wanted them to come in. I knew that I wanted to then jump to the interior and play with sound and play with the approach of them through sound, which is one of the things I love storytelling purely through sound. Whenever I can find opportunities for it, I go for it. It's the same thing that happens in the pre-credit sequence when they're in the car. I just wanted that audience to be inside that DB5 with Bond and Madeline, as it's just being
the bullets, bang, bang. It's the sound work. I have things to talk with you for hours. I mean, it sounds.
Yeah. When I was in film school, I did this short film called Victoria Paracino, and what I wanted to do was just do a sound film, something that was. Have any audience that had watched this film be in the black box of the cinema in the same way these immigrants who've been coming from Central America and Mexico had been stuck in this refrigerated trailer, and just do everything with sound, and have that claustrophobia of sound. Because I think, to have beautiful images is great, and actually making beautiful images is not as hard as one might think, but having great sound and storytelling through sound and rhythm of storytelling through sound, I think is far more, psychologically not efficient, but powerful. And so, in this sequence, the idea of we as an audience know this thing's coming, and then being in there with everyone as it approaches, to increase the tension, to increase the fear, was kind of the idea there. And then while shooting it, so we had the opportunity to work with some former military and special forces in that sequence with our stunt team, and highly disciplined guys, very good at executing, infiltration tactics. And there was something I was noticing on the monitor when we would reset, which is they would essentially go back, to first positions, after we'd done a take, and the camera would be resetting, and I would see them just kind of frozen in first position. And it was such a spooky looking thing. And I saw it a couple of times, and I was like, guys, can we do this? Can we have the camera go by when everyone's just almost like a mannequin, and then come to life as the camera's going by? Because it's unnerving.
Yeah, eerie, ghost. Yeah, ghost figures. Yeah, it's truly. I just want you to know that I was really blown away by this sequence. Like, yeah, it's very, very cinematic, and again, the use of sound in the new Bond movies is quite unique. Just in the opening sequence, this idea that you cannot use. It's such a simple and pure idea, but so dramatic. Your eardrums are numb, and you cannot use your cell phone, and it triggers a whole action sequence. That's brilliant.
The tinnitus moment, we've seen that a lot. I think Saving Private Ryan, the use of the kind of explosion as a means to let, put the audience in that kind of bewildered state. And we were trying to find something else there, that wasn't a repeat of that, but still sort of expressed the idea of what it'd be like to survive a bomb blast like that. And then again, just having your head knocked around so hard. That was something we talked about a lot too with all of our stunt teams, is, knowing that Daniel now is in his 50s and try to be a little more realistic, a bit more grounded about fights and explosions and car hits and all that does to the body, and show the fatigue, and show, how difficult it is to continue fighting. I think it makes just
the thing more dramatic and real. And it's something, I totally agree to feel that you said at the beginning, the vulnerability of the Bond making more strong at the end.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like that. There's that amazing, hallway fight sequence in Old Boy, right? And where you just see these guys just basically having no more energy by the end of this fight sequence. And it was I just loved that for the first time there was someone treating, a fight sequence in that way. And so then I think since then, I think that's affected our sort of, because when you see how difficult something is, it's almost like when you're watching a movie and someone goes underwater, right? We all kind of like involuntarily hold our breath too.
Yes. That's
the same thing watching someone fight and watching them struggle with the fight. We too are like, oh my God, I'm just as tired through this as they are. And then it becomes that much more exceptional or extraordinary when they push.
Yes, more extraordinary and more dangerous too, because realism bring danger, bring a drama that has more of a dramatic impact. And to finish, I have a last question about production design, because I thought that your Bond totally respected the Bond tradition. Mm-hmm. There's like some kind of homage for me to Ken Adam at the end, but in the same time, you have your own identity.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you can talk a bit about finding that beautiful equilibrium of paying homage to the tradition of the Bond franchise, but being a Cary Fukunaga movie in the same time.
That is one of the kind of the challenges, I think, of doing a Bond film and doing one where there's been 24 Bond films before. It's like, how do you respect tradition? How do you respect the world? How do you add some freshness and some novelty to it? And, looking back and looking forward at the same time is a kind of like it's a tightrope walk. The Ken Adams sets, having a villain's lair for the first time, really, in Daniel's run as well, and the first time in a long time, was just, we're all kind of excited about that nod back to early classic Bond films, but also trying to find a way to ground it in reality. Even though we have this sort of Russian, Japanese island, that has brutalist, not only World War II, but Soviet architecture.
Yeah.
But then you would have a Ken Adams, like, great, with that classic, grate with the circle on top. And there's all kinds of nods to previous Bond films. The inspiration, though, from that final layer comes from this. I went to Japan after I shot Maniac, and had a little vacation over Christmas, and ended up going to this art island called Naoshima that the Bennessy Foundation runs. And the Bennessy Foundation almost sounds like it's like a Bond kind of. Okay. Yeah. But Tadao Ando, the famous Japanese architect, prolific architect, had done a bunch of the buildings there, and I knew about him just by name, but I hadn't really experienced his buildings before. And to walk around some of the structures he created on that island, definitely to me was a big inspiration for what we ended up doing in the third act. And I think Mark Tildesley, the production designer, first of all, as a creative ally on the set, was incredibly important. He was a pillar of strength and enthusiasm. And it can't be underestimated how important it is to have crew members with passion and enthusiasm. Because when you're tired and you've been working 7 days a week, and you come in and someone's like, "Hey, baby, check out these drawings," and they're so excited about like a set piece or a piece of artwork that could potentially inspire a set, and then that spawns more ideas. He was such an incredible collaborator on this, and we hadn't worked together before. He's Danny Boyle's longtime collaborator, along with Sutra Lalarbe, the costume designer. But I met with them and just immediately really loved their vision and their professionalism. And I was like, "There's no reason, not to work together on this. Let's keep the team together."
That's brilliant.
And so, we hadn't worked together, and I could have been this total outsider, but he brought me in and made it me feel like completely welcome in a very new, a new school, essentially a new classroom, and had so many ideas, constantly new ideas and new ways to approach, the different story points we were playing with. Lots of photographs, not only from classic Bond films, but also, just art photographs around the world that kind of help, again, feed the fire of inspiration. One of the things I think to say about Mark is that in terms of his work in this film is that you could talk about the bigger set pieces like the lair or the lab or kind of the obvious ones that were obviously completely created. But also, we shot in so many locations around the world, from Jamaica to Norway to Italy, obviously around England and Scotland. And so many of those places, we changed what was really there. That house in Norway did not exist there. The Bond's home in Jamaica did not exist. We created these places, designed them, built them on location, or sometimes built them in Pinewood and then shipped them to location. And then in Matera, the cave that gets us into Matera doesn't exist. Mark built that. So there's this kind of seamlessness he creates around what's real and not real that the audience hopefully will never realize. But that's
no, it's seamless. It's totally seamless. And you mentioned something important here. I mean, to create a Bond villain island with his bunker, it's a lot of fun. But it's not, I will say, not difficult in the way that you are like in a playground that is very defined, but to bring Bond toward realism in a real house, in a kitchen, that's a challenge because, there's something about you're used to see him in casinos, you're so used to see him in a big environment. I mean, so that I thought that was a really successful, how you were able to bring Bond to some more, let's say, mundane reality. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, the banality of having a family.
Yeah. Yes.
Albeit with a tactical knife cutting an apple, but it's not being ready for fatherhood yet. But that was the fun part. I mean, the same way we talk about the extremes, like going from wides to close-ups. The extremes of banality to extraordinary, right? In terms of the locations. He's in this amazing, Aston Martin on this coastal highway in Norway, approaching this house in the same way that, the villain approached the house in the opening. And then suddenly, he's playing dad.
Yes, exactly. And I think that gives tons of credits again to your talent, because to be able to embrace that range from having the traditional James Bond to a more vulnerable, someone that has to deal with this new reality, which is to be a father, which is like at the roots of the human experience. It's something that I thought was like truly remarkable. Cary, it was an honor for me to talk with you. I think you congratulations again.
Likewise, honor to talk to you, Denis. Love your films. So
yeah, the same here. Thank you, and good luck, and hopefully we will had the chance to meet you in person when the world will be back to normal.
We have a dinner lined up somewhere in the world.
Yeah, exactly. Take care.
Some bread. All right. Be well.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bravo.